My name is Lucas, and for the first month of college, I dreaded the walk from the humanities building to the dining hall. Because somewhere on that path I always ran into Nate. If you'd ask anyone about him, they'd tell you he was the kind of guy who took up more space than his body did. He wasn't the tallest on the football team, but he had a way of standing, one foot rooted, the other foot lazy and ready, that looked like he could lean into a punch and enjoy it. He had the kind of face the cameras like: sharp jaw, eyes, a careful distance between blue and green, a quick grin. That could be charming if you didn't know how he used it. People knew him as a starter, a party starter, a trouble starter, the guy who seemed to have a group of friends around him at all times and rarely wore a coat, even when the October air bit your breath and little white animals. They knew him as a bully too, or at least that was how I knew him. I was the opposite, a literature freshman with a backpack that squeaked when I walked because a bottle of hand sanitizer got lodged in the lining, the kind of guy who signed up for the poetry slam and then forgot to sign up for a rehearsal time, so I recited Rilke to the damp towels in my dorm room, hoping they didn't judge me. My hair did a permanent half curl that resisted gel and made me look perpetually near sweaty even when I wasn't. I liked carrying books with covers that announced what I was reading. Nate liked to make me announce it in other ways. Look at this, he'd say to whichever orbiting satellite of friends he had with him that week, tipping his chin at the paperback in my hand, voice carrying with a practiced lightness. The myth guy, stories about gods. You think you're a god, Sam? Just a story, I'd say, trying to angle past. He'd angle with me. He never touched me in a way that left marks. He was careful like that, and the care somehow made it worse. He knocked my books out of my hands once, yes, but with a faux gentle clap that could be played off as an accident. When the professor walked by, he blocked a doorway with his shoulder and murmured, "Excuse me," in a tone that was not a question. He called me a nickname, Samantha, until I said flatly, "It's Sam," and something flickered over his face that I couldn't read. He smiled a lot for someone who didn't seem amused. The second week of October, the campus smelled like damp leaves and pumpkin spice and the metallic tang of the gym when you walk past it, and the world is still humid with the sweat of other people. I worked 3 nights a week at the library circulation desk, because it meant fewer people, fewer questions, fewer things that required the sort of confidence that I didn't have yet. On Wednesdays, I closed up at 11:30, turned out the lamps in the reading room, and locked the catalog terminal with the same small relief I reserved for finishing a poem. The night it happened, I was later than usual, because the printer jammed and some graduate student got stuck in a scaffold of paper right before closing. I left out the staff door behind the archives and took the side path along the parking lot because the main quad lights were half out and campus security had taped a bright yellow sign to the lamp post under maintenance: use alternate routes. I put my headphones in to listen to some song that made the pavement sound like it had a heartbeat. When I saw the man leaning against the bike rack, I thought he was a student trying to sober up. Maybe from the drink that smells like a liquor store, dressed up too eagerly for prom. He wasn't. He stepped forward and I saw the knife. It wasn't big. It was the kind of knife you see on TV when the camera cuts to a glint of metal and leaves the rest to your imagination. But it was a knife, and it was in someone's hand, and it was pointed at me. "Phone," he said. He had a hoodie up and a baseball cap under it, and his voice was thin and tight like someone calling a dog. They didn't want to wake the neighbors. "Phone." In wallet, I'd like to say I stayed calm, that I was rational, that I remembered the self-defense flyer the raw Maya had taped near the elevator with the graphic showing where to kick someone if you really needed to. I did none of those things. My brain knocked me back to a fluorescent middle school hallway in the memory of a kid larger than me blocking my locker with his hand, and I was 12 again and helium light with panic. The man stepped closer and I fumbled my backpack off one shoulder. The strap snagged and bit into my neck. I said something like, "Okay, okay," but my voice was syrup. It stuck. He reached toward me, the knife flashed, and in that instant a voice cut through the air behind me. "Hey, it was casual. You could put that tone at the beginning of a party in a line at a coffee shop." It Didn't belong here, but it was here anyway, and it was Nate. He was walking. Like he always did, like the space belonged to him, and he decided who got how much. He had a duffel on his shoulder and a smudge of something dark beneath his lower lip turf, maybe or grease. He took one look at the knife and his posture shifted by degrees, not enough to be obvious but enough that something in him had braced. Back off. The man hissed, angling toward him. Nate didn't. He lowered his duffel to the ground with the same care I'd seen him use on a football once after a touchdown, as if it was something to be set down softly. You don't want to do this, he said, eyes on the man's face. Security's a minute away. They looped the parking lot around midnight. The man glanced around, the lights stuttered. My heartbeat was above the trees. I had the absurd thought that Nate was going to try to talk him into a different crime. Phone, the man said again, like he was clinging to a script, and then he moved toward me, fast, hand in my jacket, a twist of fabric and a push that carried the smell of stale beer and something like mint gone bad. I don't remember deciding to do anything. I remember Nate moving. There's a particular sound bodies make when they collide in real life, not the thud TV suggests, but a sloppy, intimate noise like wet laundry hitting tile. That sound happened, and then there was shouting and feet and hands. I saw a blur of steel and the awful realization that it was too close to Nate's face. He moved with a crooked grace, not elegant but practiced, duck and turn, shoulder in, elbow up. The knife went sideways. It skittered across the asphalt. For 1 second I saw Nate's hand grab the man's wrist and twist. The man cried out, stumbled, tore himself away, and then he was running. There was the scuff of sneakers and the high, breathless sound of someone who has already decided to be gone. Nate started after him, stopped and exhaled hard through his teeth like he wanted to chew the sound and couldn't. He looked at me. You okay? He said. It was nonsense. Of course I wasn't. I tried because there was blood on his knuckles, because sometimes in the presence of violence, people say unhelpful things like you and him and me. And can we not? And that was where my vocabulary had landed. Your hand, it's fine. He flexed it. The blood made a little constellation across his skin. He nicked me. Security, I said, my voice suddenly remembering it knew how to be loud. We should already coming. He nodded toward the blue emergency pose across the lot. It pulsed. My vision tunneled in on the way his chest rose and fell, the black triangle of the tattoo peeking beneath his sleeve that I'd never noticed before. Can you breathe, Sam? Nobody had said my name like that in weeks, not the mocking drag, not the half-invented little flirt people sometimes did when they didn't know whether you were a joke or not. He said it like it belonged to me, and I was startled by the swell of it. Air finally cut oxygen paths in my chest. Yeah, he took a step forward, stopped short like there was a line I couldn't see. He didn't touch you, no. The adrenaline made me laugh at the wrong time. I swallowed it. He tried. Yeah, I saw you moved, and he said it not like praise, not like a rebuke, but like a fact that mattered. Then the flood of people, security, bright lights. On still night, a woman with a reflective vest whose face did the sympathetic thing while she asked if I'd been drinking, if I needed a paramedic, if I wanted to talk to a counselor. My mouth went ahead of my mind and answered, and somewhere in there I heard Nate explain the angle of the knife in a calm voice that surprised me. When I glanced at him, he was looking at me, not at the knife, not at the security woman, and when our eyes met, he gave me this look I hadn't seen from him before, an unadorned human look. We're going to take you both in to file a report, the security woman said. You really should get that hand looked at, sir. It's fine, Nate said again, and it sounded automatic, like the phrase had worn a groove in his mouth. Come on, I said. And I was the one surprised by my own voice. At least run some water over it. We ended up in the bathroom of my dorm because it was closest, because the Ra's door was open, but Maya was on the phone and waved at me with eyes that asked 10 questions I wasn't ready to answer. There's something about the sterile smell of dorm bathrooms late at night that makes everything else smell more alive. Nate stood by the sink like he didn't know where to put himself without a team telling him, and I ran the tap until the water turned from cold to hand warm. You don't have to, he began. Shut up, I said, then I looked up quickly. I mean, please let me. He didn't move for a second, then he held his hand out. It was broad as expected. The knuckles not too badly cut, but split in two places where the skin had a choice to stay together and didn't. I dabbed a paper towel under the water and brought it to his skin, and he hissed and said softly, "Ow, okay, you could have gotten hurt," I said, and what I meant was, "I don't understand you." He watched my fingers carefully as if I was the one doing something dangerous. "So could you?" "That's yeah." I pressed the towel against his knuckle and watched the red press into white, then pink, then pale. "Why did you interrupt him?" Insert yourself becomes suddenly someone not assigned that role in my head. "Help me," I said at last. He snorted, which wasn't the answer I expected. "What kind of question is that?" "The honest one." He swallowed. The brashness in him faded a degree. "I saw a guy with a knife. That's no one should be alone for that, even people you hate," I almost said. The word felt dramatic in my mouth. "Don't like." His jaw moved. He looked away at the mirror, then back at his hand. "I don't." He shut his mouth like it had teeth. "I'm an ass," he said finally. "That's not the same thing." We stood there with that. The sink dripped, the light flickered in that way. That makes your brain think of old movies and train stations. I tore open a Band-Aid packet, and Nate watched silent, as if the tiny rectangle of beige plastic might do. "Magic, sit," I said, nodding toward the counter. He hopped up without a joke. Without a swagger, I stuck one Band-Aid over the worst cut, then another smaller one on the scrape. He flexed his fingers experimentally. "Thanks," he said, and it was unfamiliar on him, but he wore it. "You should tell someone about this." I meant more than the cut, I realized. A coach? I don't know. I wasn't sure why I was casting around for adults like a kid again. He smiled a little. "They only like hearing I broke things on the field, not off." He slid down. "Sam," I looked up. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it like a hard word for all the crap. "I'm sorry." I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I hadn't planned for this moment because I hadn't expected it. I thought I might imagine it in some long night where I rewrote the day, but actually hearing it, I didn't know what to do with it. A laugh rose and I pushed it down again. "Okay," I said slowly. "Thank you." He nodded, and there was a sliver of relief in it that made something shift behind my ribs. He took a breath like he was going to say more, and then Maya knocked on the door frame. "Sam," her voice was careful. She looked between us and decided not to start with a dozen questions. "Security said they don't need you until morning. That okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Thanks." Her gaze snagged on Nate's bandaged hand. "You good?" "I'm fine," he said, and this time it was almost a joke, and she gave him a look that said she'd heard it before and wasn't impressed. She left. We were alone in the hum of the bathroom again. When he left, he stood in the doorway like there was a script he should follow and couldn't remember. "See you," he said. "See you," I replied, and my voice had a shape I didn't recognize. Softer, maybe, or braver, I wasn't sure. After that, everything changed, not all at once, not in the way people like to make it in stories where the sun rises and someone holds a speech and everyone claps. That's not how people work. As far as I can tell, we move like weather fronts. We shift, we storm, and we clear, and sometimes we never stop raining in one place. With Nate, the first thing that changed was the way he looked at me in the hallway. He didn't avoid me, he didn't hunt me down either. He saw me, and he didn't smile that way. He lifted his chin in emotion. That meant both hello and "I have no idea what I'm doing. Please don't call me on it." I returned it because I also had no idea what I was doing. It felt like discovering a new way of walking down a street I thought I knew by heart. We had intro to Lit Together Fates joke, and where he used to slouch 3 rows back and whisper smartboard things to his teammate. He moved to the end of my row and took out a notebook he might have used before. I didn't say anything. The professor was talking about unreliable narrators. I thought privately that my life had one too. After class, he caught up with me, which made me stiffen out of habit, and he must have seen it because his smile faltered. "I'm not going to," he gestured vaguely. "I wanted to ask if you could help me with the midterm essay." I stopped so fast. Freshman behind me bumped my shoulder and muttered, "Sorry, you want my help." He lifted one shoulder. "You don't have to." He rubbed the edge of his bandage with a Thumb like a nervous tick, I don't read the way you read, he took a risk, you're good at that. Flattery felt like a trap, it had been used that way before but he looked like a guy inching onto a ledge. Okay, I said after a beat, we can meet at the third floor coffee place, less noisy. That turned into coffees with steam curling upward into November air, my notes sliding across to his side of the table, his pencil tapping rhythms. That would have annoyed me if I didn't notice it stopped when he concentrated. He listened, that was the first revelation. He looked like a guy who filled silences with his own voice, but when I spoke about metaphor and illusion, he sat back and his mouth did this, not smile. That meant his brain had moved into a different gear. He asked good questions too, not the kind you're taught to ask to pretend you're interested, real ones. So when Baldwin says that he's scared of love, he said, chin in hand, does he mean scared of being seen or scared of what he'll do to someone? Maybe both, I said, surprised I got to say maybe to him. Maybe that's the point. It's not neat. He grunted a sound that meant acceptance, not skepticism. Not neat, he repeated and wrote it down like he was allowed to, like mess was part of the assignment. After a week of this, he started telling me little things I hadn't asked but wanted to. No, not the big confession stuff, just details that were unguarded, and in their unguardedness, important. He had a younger sister, he said, and she was the only person who could get him to dance sober. He liked chocolate milk in the ugliest carton the campus store sold. He'd wanted to study architecture for about 5 seconds in 10th grade until a guidance counselor told him to stick to what he was good at. He said it with a little heat and I banked that away. In return, I told him things I didn't usually, that I used to read under my covers with a flashlight, not because of a strict parent, mine were fine, but because the small pool of light made me feel like the world could get contained into manageable circles, and outside the circle might be wild. But inside it I was okay, that I like poems that didn't rhyme because they felt more like me, that sometimes when someone laughed in a crowded room and I didn't know it, what, every laugh in the world felt like it was aimed at me. He didn't say that's dumb or get over it. He didn't say anything for a minute and then looking at my hands he said, I always laugh first, doesn't matter what the joke is, I get there first so no one can beat me to it. I looked at him properly, then the way you look at landscapes you've misread, and suddenly the path becomes obvious, rock here, river here, a path cut not by choice but by a series of unavoidable weathers. I wanted to say I see you, but instead I said tentatively, that sounds like a lot of work. He laughed without humor. Yeah, soon the afternoons we spent on literature bled into evenings in the gym, where he introduced me almost shyly to the small room tucked behind the weight racks where a few mats lay and a poster on the wall demonstrated stances so basic even I could pretend to copy them. Not trying to turn you into an action movie, he said, just stances, stuff that makes you feel less, I don't know, like someone who falls apart when told to hand over phone. I asked Riley. He looked stricken. I didn't mean I know. I put my hands up. Teach me how not to be that scared. Maybe scared is normal, he said. Like he had a right to define it. We'll try to make your body remember other stuff it can do too. He stood behind me and arranged my arms softly like a music teacher. He moved my feet an inch wider. Bass, he murmured, you're a tree, not a sapling, there you go. Words made me snort and he grinned, and something light moved between us and settled like dust moes in late afternoon. We kept an awkward distance, partly because we were inventing a new language for who we were to each other and partly because it was easier not to be seen. Campus loves a story. People make them when they run out. We were already the bones of a story and I didn't know if I wanted my name in anyone's mouth but mine. But the world doesn't grant private chamber music to people who are used to playing loud. Word filtered out somehow that Nate had been seen with me more than once, and then the rumor machine did what it did best. His friends asked questions I didn't hear, laugh, shouted things in the gym that made him hold his jaw differently. My friend Luca, who shared a double with me and was the kind of quiet you don't notice until you realize your favorite tea has been restocked without asking, said one night as he put his phone on his stomach and stared at The sailing, you serious man, what do you mean with him? He didn't say Nate's name like it was a spell he didn't want to invoke. I don't know what it is. I said honestly, I think I want to find out. Luca turned his head. He better not hurt you, he already had. I wanted to say he'd hurt me for weeks. But that hurt had grown edges and then softened and then shifted shape until I couldn't tell if it was the same thing I was feeling. Now he's trying, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in it. He's trying really hard. Mid-November brought with it a campus fundraising thing that pretended to be a carnival. There was a Ferris wheel that had seen too many summers and a churro stand and someone's acoustic band doing covers 2 Shades Too Earnest. It was cold enough to see your breath and I was wrapped in a scarf that Lucas said made me look like a French movie extra. I almost didn't go because the idea of lights and crowds and the chance of being jostled made me feel like the knife was still out there in the dark. But we'd been pushing against the edges of our own private park bench for weeks, and I figured this was a chance to act like a regular person. Nate texted an act that 2 weeks before would have been a weird plot twist in a life I didn't think had them. He asked where I was. I told him. He sent a thumbs up. 2 minutes later he was next to me in a jacket this time, hands shoved into his pockets. You made it, he said. Like maybe he wasn't sure I would. You too, I said, and then we stood there, watching the Ferris wheel spin, and I had the sudden mad urge to get on it because it was a cliché and cliché is belong to someone and I wanted one. Want to try? He asked as if to answer me. Sure, I said, voice too high, then cleared my throat. Let's go. In the little metal seat as we jerked upward, the campus fell away in big inhales. The lights looked like someone had spilled glitter and then forgot to clean up. My palms were damp on the cold bar. Nate looked at my hands, not my face. You okay? I will be, I said. It was mostly true. At the top, the wheel paused and the conversation went quiet. The way you do when you're suddenly high enough to see the geometry of your place in the world. It was both comforting and terrifying. He leaned back and the seats swayed and he said very simply, I've been thinking about that night. Me too. I felt something. Then he ran hand over his face like he could wipe the word away. Not okay. This will sound just. He gestured helplessly. Nate at a loss was an act of theater I'd never paid to see and I couldn't look away. You can say it, I said, surprised to hear myself say it like I was sure. I was scared, he said so softly I almost didn't catch it. Not just of the knife of he swallowed, of seeing you scared. He exhaled and in that white cloud was an admission. I didn't like how that felt. I turned to look at him. The light did that carnival thing where everything looks prettier and more fake, and for a second under it he looked younger, like the version of him that might have existed before sports taught him how to be a person. I didn't like it either, I said, and then you were there and it was a lot. He laughed, short understatement. We looked out at the lights again, a couple 2 seats over kissed and my stomach did a slow backflip. It wasn't that I'd never kissed anyone, just that the way I wanted it with him felt like standing in a doorway you didn't know how to enter without setting the hinges on fire. Sam, Nate's voice was careful. I've been a jerk, I know, and I know a lot of the reasons why and none of them matter if the damage is done, but I want to. I don't know. He dragged a hand through his hair. Start over, try again, be different near you. It felt like the Ferris wheel had stopped because the world did for a second. It hadn't. I still heard a child somewhere crying because he dropped his funnel cake, but I met Nate's eyes and said, I want that too. He took in a breath so sharp I thought he'd cut his lungs on it. He didn't move closer, neither did I. It wasn't the place, or maybe it was exactly the place and we were not that kind of brave yet. The wheel moved again. The moment shifted to the next because that's what moments do. The campus predictably did not applaud our new alignment. His teammate Owen, a name I only knew because he said it loudly often and in locker rooms. I passed on my way to the pool, started making comments in the hallway that were just coded enough to avoid official reprimand. You tutoring him in more than lit, Sammy, he'd say when we were in earshot. He teaching you how to get physical. The words weren't original, but the sting landed because they weren't meant to be. Nate told him to shut up exactly once. The second time he Squared off and said low enough for only a few people to hear, "Say that again and I'll rearrange your smile for free." It could have been funny in a different context. Owen didn't press it, people. Like Owen want you to dance, they don't want to fight. The third time it got messy was at a party, the football house. Through to celebrate something they didn't need to celebrate to have an excuse. I went because I was invited as furniture. By Luca's lab partner because the night was too long and I was aimless, and aimless is dangerous. Nate wasn't there. At first, the music was too loud and bodies press on me in ways that make my teeth ache. I found a corner by the back door and practiced breathing in counts. Of 4, a guy I'd never seen stopped in front of me and tilted his head. "Why so serious?" he said. He smelled like those watermelon Jolly Ranchers that make your mouth water whether you wanted to or not. "Smile for me, I'm good," I said, "the way you say it when you are not." He looked past me and saw no one who would matter in case of escalation. "Heard you've been spending time with our boy Nate," he said, teaching him poetry. "Roses are red, violets are gay." I could have walked away, that would have been the adult thing, but something in me had grown tired of moving around people's ugliness like it on the sidewalk. "You rehearsed that?" I asked. "You should try again in the mirror." He smiled, not with his mouth. "You're mouthy, that's hot." It happened fast. He reached toward me with a hand like something friendly and wasn't. I flinched, and before I could decide whether to push his wrist away, he grabbed at the front of my shirt. I stumbled backward into the screen door, which gave with a violence that made the noise louder than it was. He laughed. It was a rotten sound. Then from the doorway 2 doorways over, Nate, he moved differently here than he had that night in the lot. Less fight, more calculus. Eyes, exits, numbers. He was at my side in a step and a half. His hand didn't touch me, but I felt its heat near my arm. "Back up," he said to the guy, and there was nothing casual about it. The party's music made the moment weirdly private. The air between the drum beats held us. "Relax," the guy said. "Hands up," grinned Sharky, "just saying hi." "Back up," Nate repeated, and the guy did, the way you reverse when you almost step into a pothole. "Jesus," the guy said, "is he your girlfriend or something?" Scrape inside my chest. Nate's face did something that wasn't anger, it was cold. "Try that again." He said, "It's a phrase people love," but he said it like he meant use your brain. The guy didn't, but he left because bullies like heat and not burn. We stepped outside. Night had the kind of air that holds your cheeks and tells you you're alive whether you want to be or not. I was shaking, but it felt less like old shaking and more like an animal readying itself to do something. Nate's shoulders were tight as rope. "I can't always be there," he said. It sounded like a confession and a warning. "I want to be, but I can't." "I know," I said, and I did. "You can't build a life on being saved. I need to know how to save myself." We stood there with a truth like new shoes. He nodded once, then I surprised myself by reaching without thinking and taking his hand. Small, simple, his fingers tightened around mine like they'd been waiting for a command. For 3 seconds it was the only thing in the world, and then the door banged open and we dropped hands so fast an observer might have thought we were frightened of gravity. I was, but something had changed. It wasn't nothing anymore. It had a name I wasn't ready to say out loud, but it existed. The days folded over themselves. We got through the midterm and Nate got a B, and I felt pride in a way that made my chest hurt. He brought me hot chocolate after my poetry reading and stood at the back, hands in pockets, and when I read a piece that I'd never read aloud before about fear and stairs and falling anyway, he watched me like he was the one being graded. We had our first undefinable, almost argument 2 weeks later in my dorm when he showed up late to study and I asked where he'd been and he said, "Practice ran long," and I said, "Practice always runs long," and he said, "What do you want me to do? Drop my scholarship?" And I said without thinking, "No, drop your armor," which is the sort of thing that gets you labeled as something. He stared at me. For a moment I thought he was going to leave. Then he sat down heavily on my floor, back against my bed, and said, frustrated and quiet, "I don't know how." I slid down beside him, our shoulders touched. "We'll learn," I said. "Both of us, we did. We learned in ways that didn't look like learning." He taught me to throw a punch and then taught me that most situations don't need one. He taught me to widen my stance and lower my center of gravity so I didn't topple over emotionally at a stiff breeze. I taught him to annotate in the margins like he was having a conversation with the author and was allowed to disagree. I taught him that some poems don't care if you get them and instead want to sit with you until you stop trying to own them. We went grocery shopping at midnight the night before Thanksgiving break because neither of us had plans to go home until the next day. He picked out cereal like he was choosing a weapon. I explained the difference between oregano and thyme while he claimed not to care, and then admitted he did because his grandmother used to use one and not the other and he missed her, he said sometimes at night. He felt like the world was a room with the lights off and he knew where everything was until something in the corner moved and he didn't. He said it like a person says a joke and waits to see if you know it's not a joke. In early December, when the first real snow fell and everyone became either 8 years old or 90, we were walking across the quad when he scooped up a handful and threw it at me, cheeks red from the cold, laughter entirely unarmed. I launched one back, bad aim, worse power. He exaggerated a fall, sprawled on the grass like he'd been felled by a mighty warrior. He lay there and watched the flakes melt as they landed on his sleeve and said, "You know when you step into a lake and it's colder than you thought, and for a second your breath you don't know if you can get it back." He turned toward me. "Then it's fine, better than fine, it's alive." "Yes," I said, and my breath did that thing. He sat up and looked at me with a focus that made the air between us draw tight. It could have happened then, it almost did. Instead, he reached out and brushed snow from my hair with fingers that lingered a second too long. I turned my head into the touch before I could stop myself, and he froze like a deer, saying, "Is it safe?" We didn't move. Then we did, because always around finals things took a turn because they were always going to. The security office called me in. They wanted to follow up on the incident in October. They used words like escalation and patterns and concern. Apparently the guy with the knife had been seen near campus again, and I could feel my body go back to that terrible shape in the lot. The smallness. Nate insisted on coming with me. The officer looked at him unsurely and I said flatly, "He stays." Into my shock, the officer shrugged and did not push it. Afterward, outside the office, I leaned against the wall and swallowed. The hallway smelled like coffee and the fake pine wreath hung by someone's cheerful hand. "I hate this," I said. "I know," he said. "You could get in trouble if you get involved again." He looked at me, eyes level. "I'll get in trouble a lot worse if I don't and something happens to you." He did not look away. "Look, Sam," the air around us vibed like a guitar string too tight. He was going to say something and I was going to hear it, and then we would be different. We were interrupted by Owen, of course. He sauntered down the hall with another player and saw us, and the expression on his face did that thing I hate where people decide they know your life and rewrite it for you. He said, "Look at the happy couple." My whole body tensed, not with fear but with expectation. Expectation of what? Of a fight, of humiliation. Nate turned, and if the knife guy brought out one version of him, this brought out another. "Still walk on," he said to Owen. "Simple." Owen tossed his hands up. "Hey man, not my fault, your edge." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He smirked it. It wasn't Nate who moved first, it was me. I stepped forward and said with a clarity I hadn't known I owned, "You have something to say it to me." He blinked. He hadn't expected the furniture to talk back. "On what?" I asked, inventing the oldest insult in the book, revising masculinity to whatever this is. I gestured at his posture. "You're boring." His mouth opened and closed. He'd been called many things. I assumed boring wasn't in his internal dictionary. Nate's hand was near mine, not touching, close enough that I could count the pulse beats in the space between us. Owen's friend tugged his sleeve. "Leave it," he muttered. "Coach doesn't need another meeting." Owen said something indistinct like "whatever" and left. The adrenaline was a shiny coin rolling around my body, bumping into corners. I exhaled. My legs were shaking. Nate looked at me like I'd pulled a rabbit out of my sleeve. "You were," he paused. "You were amazing." I let out a laugh that sounded like I'd been underwater and only now broke surface. My voice was Steady, my legs weren't. That's how it works, he said, and there was something like reverence in his tone. For once, he was the one whose hand found mine. We stood there like that for what felt like a while and probably wasn't. Then he let go carefully because the world was still. Unfortunately that night I couldn't sleep, so I did the thing I always did, put on my coat and walked to the old library steps where the stone lion guarded the entrance and stared off into the middle distance like it knew something we didn't. The snow had slowed to a drift, the lamp light made the flakes a show. I heard footsteps and did not tense, which surprised me. Nate sat beside me without a word and tipped his head back. I wanted to tell you something, he said, voice turning cloud in the cold, and I keep not. You can now, I said, or you cannot, both are okay. He looked at me with a gratitude that was almost painful. I'm not straight, he said, abrupt as ripping a bandage. Then he took a breath. And I am scared, and I am tired of being scared and taking that out on other people. He rubbed his hands together like he could start a fire with them. You make me want to stop. He laughed at himself. That sounded like a line in a bad movie. Maybe we just made a bad movie good, I said, and he smiled in a way that threatened to undo me. I like you, he said next, simple as that, like a sentence you practice and then finally make muscle memory. I want more of this. His hand gesture between us, the night, the fact of our bodies near each other and not touching. I like you too, I said. I want, and here I looked down at his hands, bandage long gone and his knuckles healed but for a faint thin line. More of this and this, like how you are with me. He leaned in slowly like a tide, giving me time to go to laugh, to make a joke, to run, because he still would have let me. I didn't. I met him halfway. Our first kiss was none of the things those movies tell you it will be. It wasn't fireworks or the end of a war. It was better and smaller. It was a new language you only learned by speaking it. He exhaled into my mouth like he'd been holding his breath, and I let him know he didn't have to. We broke apart and did the thing where you drop your forehead to someone else's because you're both human and grateful and trying not to laugh because joy is ridiculous. He pressed a hand to my cheek like it belonged there. We stayed until our noses hurt and we had to go back inside. We did not turn into a poster couple overnight. The world remained as it was, only now I had a person in it who made the sharp edges less sharp, and I wanted to make his edge so keen when pointed outward and so cruel when pointed inward soften. He told his sister over FaceTime and she squealed and clapped her hands and said, "Nady, you dork, of course." And he wiped his eyes in a way that he pretended was an itch. He did not tell his parents. He did not have the kind of parents you call from a dorm and tell that kind of truth. Not yet, maybe not ever. We made deals with the future and decided to keep them when we could. His team simmered but calmed, not because they suddenly became enlightened but because as the semester wound down, people had papers to write and burdens to carry, and we became less interesting than deadlines. Owen kept his distance like a man who'd found out the fence he'd been leaning on was electric. Luke dapped me in the hallway and said under his breath, "I like the way he looks at you now." I felt that like a blessing. The night before we went home for winter break, we revisited the place. It began the lot behind the library. The lights had been fixed. They cast clean shadows that didn't make shapes into monsters. We walked with our shoulders brushing and stopped near the bike rack where the metal still bore a little scratch of something that could have been nothing but felt like the scored mark of a before and after. You ever think about if I hadn't been there? Nate asked, not with guilt but curiosity, like someone trying to map a different version of a city. I have, I said, sometimes, not often. Me too, he said. He slid his hand into mine. I think about it and then I stop because we don't have to live there. No, I agreed, squeezing his fingers. We don't. He turned toward me and in the calm light, he looked like the person he'd been trying to be when no one watched. Relaxed, not waiting for a cue. I want to say something corny, he warned. Please do. I'm proud of you, he said, for getting up, for meeting me halfway when I didn't deserve it, for telling Owen to get lost, for the poem about the stairs. You listened, I said, surprised again by my ability to be surprised. I listened to you, he said like it was simple. I like your voice. I don't hear anything else when you're talking. I kissed him again because our words were doing a lot, and sometimes the way to say thank you to a person's honesty is to treat it with your own. He kissed back and smiled into it, and I tasted the sweetness of the stupid hot chocolate he still insisted on buying before all the carts were shut down for break. We parted at the stairs to our buildings. He stood there and looked up at his window like he was seeing his whole life from a new angle. Call me when you get to your mom's, he said. I will, I promised. I watched him go with an ease I didn't recognize, until I realized it had a name: trust. He'd done the brave thing in a parking lot that night, yes, but he'd done braver things since. He'd apologized. He'd shown up, he'd asked to be different and then tried to be. He'd made something soft in himself and didn't run from it. I had tried too. We were both still trying. On the way back to my room, snow lifted from the branches and fell in a hush. My breath made plumes, my phone buzzed. A text from Nate: forgot to say sleep well, dream something stupid, see you in a few days. I smiled at the screen like I was in a movie, because the rare thing is that sometimes your life is allowed to be one, and sometimes you get the boy you didn't know how to ask the world for, and sometimes you get to walk across a campus in winter and feel like the air is new because it is. When I turned my key in the dorm door, I paused. I thought about the man with the knife and the way fear makes you small. And the way love, though we weren't saying that word yet, not out loud, not to each other, puts a hand at your back and says, it's okay to take up space. I thought about the way Nate had stood next to me on the steps between me and whatever he thought might come down the path, and I thought about the way he'd stood beside me in a dozen moments since, asking nothing but honesty in return. I clicked the lock, I went inside, I made a circle of light with my desk lamp and sat in it, and the circle was bigger than it had ever been. I texted Nate a single picture. My tattered copy of a book of poems spread open on my bed like a heart. He responded with a photo of his hand, the faint line on his knuckles visible, a caption: healed. Then another text: me too. I turned off the light and lay back and let the dark feel like a place I knew the shapes of. I had places I wanted to go, a person I wanted to walk with, a winter to live through, and a spring to find. I thought of his laugh, I thought of a Ferris wheel stopping at the top. I thought of the way he'd said my name like it belonged to me. My name is Sam. This is the story of the time I thought I knew what the word bully meant and what it means to be brave, and how one night with a knife and a boy with a loud voice taught me that the scariest thing in the world is not being seen and choosing to be anyway. It's not waves and it's not storms and it's not noise. It's a person beside you and your breath and the steady thing between you that says,